With hypnotherapy, we just get you to start thinking about what you've not been paying attention to on your unconscious level. Then once you start to find out what's been going on unconsciously that you've not been paying attention to, you pay attention to it. 90% of change comes from attention, comes from awareness. So if you're not aware, nothing will change. But if you're aware of it, like I was with the anxiety to those mini panic attacks to drinking alcohol to numb that down, playing video games, every session, what do you want to work through? How do you want to be different? And that's everybody's story. Then once you find those questions, those answers to that question, we can work through it. We can make that happen.
Welcome, everyone. It's really exciting because we today are going to talk about the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is what connects us to the soul. It's where all the hidden layers are. I have my dear brother here, Andrew Waldowski. He is a master hypnotherapist with almost 7 years of experience in private practice. He's done many sessions with people on breaking addictions and poor habits. And he's a perfect person to ask all the questions, how we can connect to the subconscious mind, how can we change and transform our habits, and how does that help us in our overall soul communication. Welcome, Andrew. So excited to have you here. Tell us more about your personal practice. How'd you get into hypnotherapy? And how did hypnotherapy help you grow on the soul level?
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. It's great to be here. Yeah, it's all about action. Change comes from action. And I feel that I had so many changes occur in my life, all the way through being a teenager to an adult. I had just a lot of unprocessed stuff from my childhood. And I'm what we call extrasensory, just extra picking up on energy and emotion and all that stuff. As a kid, I didn't really know how to handle. And then as an adult, young adult, it was even worse because I was around many people. I was in and out of a lot of jobs. I was in just unique spaces with just a lot of high energy and didn't know how to like influx that energy and keep people around that I needed to be around and things like that. So I led into some bad habits, and some of those bad habits led me into some less than positive spaces. But you know how it goes. Once you get into a habit, it's like an automatic unconscious thought, and behavior and emotions go with it too. It's acquired through repetition. So I was repeating things that were not so positive for me. And I was finding that result was leading me down the wrong road, is what we call it, or down the wrong path. Once I was on the wrong path for a period of time, I finally landed into a space where I met somebody on my path that had a lot of meaning to me. And that's my wife, Amy. When I met her, then it was like, oh, what am I even doing? These questions started popping into myself because I was thinking about this other person and what they were thinking about me too. Then when I did that, then I would say, oh, what would she think if I did that? And that started in to make me more what we call conscious. And even as a kid, they would call that trust your conscious. And I never really understood what that meant. But then as I found out, like it's all about how you talk to yourself and then what you say to yourself. And those words, that language constructs for me pictures because I'm very visual. Sometimes it constructs feelings for people, or sometimes they just hear the words. But whatever it is, you get this kind of image of what we call reality going on unconsciously. And that unconscious reality shapes and molds the reality we see externally. A lot of people, I think, want to change what's going on outside, and they don't really pay attention to what's going on inside. I want to change my income. I want to change my habit here. I want to change this, but they don't see what's going on inside. So for me, I started to catch on to what I feel and what I think created a state of being. And my state of being, which I call a positive mental state, created good outcomes. Those states of being that I was in that was a negative one created the not so good outcomes. So all through life, I had a lot of negative ones that I was in. And then I would fuel kind of those by going into patterns of addiction, patterns of bad habits, like eating too much sugar, drinking alcohol, playing video games, watching Netflix marathons, all that stuff that we call bad habits. And so with that, having the negative attitude, and then the bad habits that went with that, the bad attitude, I found that I was a less than positive person all around. You see what I mean? And so for me, what happened was I changed one piece of the story by piece until the attitude became a more positive attitude. Then when that more positive attitude kicked in, certain things fell off automatically. Like I quit smoking, for example. Then I quit drinking. Then I quit Netflix, and I quit all of the different things I was doing just because I changed the thoughts that I think and the feelings that I have and just the very definitions of emotions. I've stopped thinking about my past so much and more into the what we call the power of now, right? Eckhart Tolle writes that book. And I read that book and I found out that's really what it was that I was doing. I was getting more present and I was changing my story actively in the now. And that allowed me to shift into a better story, a better internal representation as a bigger
So,
story.
would you say most of people, before they have a spiritual awakening, running these stories of how things should be? And
Mm,
really, the idea is to step out of the story and start seeing our reality and our life perhaps in different perspective. And that's what
that's right.
helps us to evolve and changes the attitude as well. So, hypnotherapy essentially is helping to shift that story. I think is important one because we get stuck. It's like a broken record in some ways that it's hard to stop. I do get a lot of clients that just so much in their mind.
That's right. And it really is the series of routine behaviors. Most people get out of bed on the same side. They go to the bathroom, they get a cup of coffee, they go take a shower, they get dressed, they drive to work the same way, they do the same things every single day. They see the same people that push the same emotional buttons, and that becomes the routine. And that becomes what I call like a program. The story or the program or the map is what we could call this. And this all means the same thing. This is called your internal representation. And what you represent internally has to deal with time and space, has to do with energy or matter, and it has to do with the language that you use, meaning the tone and the tempo you talk in, but also the words that you use back to yourself. And then that kicks on the program of, okay, I'm telling myself that I feel like this, so I do feel like that. And because I feel like that, my belief system is this, or my values are this. Okay. So that all is the story. That all has to do with the story. And that's not the territory. It's just the map. It's your representation of what's going on. But the territory has everybody else in their own map of what's going on, right? So when we have an event happen, like the sun's going to set tonight on all of us, assuming you're watching this during the day, then it's going to come and set and it's going to get dark tonight. Then after the dark tonight, when the morning comes, the sun's going to rise. This is a common happening that happens to everybody. And it's just how we represent it is always different. Some people don't get up and see the sunrise. Some people do. And so we all have a different value system or belief system, and that's called our behavior. So what I'd found is that you change the way you feel about things, you change the way you think about things, then you start to change. But if nothing changes, you stay in the same habit. You'll go check Facebook, you'll take a picture, you'll post it to Facebook, you tweet you something, you Instagram something, you go through the newsreel and you feel really connected to everything that's in your life. But really at the same time, it's just a set of routine behaviors. You're
So there's a disconnection happening, like a program. Everyone
yeah,
is like in a zombie mode, but it makes me also think how we used to be in the primordial days when we living in caves and there was danger outside and we had to go outside and get some berries. Sameness equals safety. The primordial brain, the ego mind is used to that sameness, right? The same routine because
yeah,
that's safety. But we right now in a different era, we step it into the higher frequencies, into more prefrontal cortex with the joy, abundance, and different frequencies we need to work with. That's where I think your work comes in deeper under the surface. In my work, doing past life regressions, having people go into their deeper inner subconscious selves
yeah,
to connect to truth.
that's right. We have three brains. And in hypnosis, we learn this because we learn about neuroscience that you have a spinal cord that runs up to the front of the brain that's attached, and that's part of the brain. And then you've got a vagus nerve that runs down the front of the body. So if you're dealing with anxiety right now, a common thing with hypnotherapy is anxiety. And one of the quickest things to do to alleviate anxiety is to drop your jaw and then to relax your tongue and then just take a deep breath. What that
Mm.
does is it automatically will take you out of your head brain and out of your reptile brain and put you into the middle brain. So you have what's called the heart brain. You have the head brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. And the head brain is making meaning of this right now. It's saying, yeah, Andrew's talking and he's making sense. That's called cognition. It's also imagination and symbols. So it's where hypnosis occurs. The minute somebody says imagine, that's the world's fastest hypnosis induction. Took me years to learn that, but it is just one of those things that once you start to find out you're imagining, you're going more inside and you're constructing your reality. That's called altered state or a hypnotic trance, whatever you prefer.
In hypnosis, like the quantum hypnosis, some people have hard time imagining or seeing pictures, and sometimes they're stuck in this, like, I'm just seeing black.
Yeah,
What's
totally.
your perception of that? Because you have so many clients. Why are they just so stuck in their more rational brain that it's hard for them to connect to the right hemisphere where there is the pictures?
So the head brain, you've got the gut brain as well, which is your stomach and your whole intestinal system, which is self preservation. Those people are in Ayurveda called kapha doshas. They're bigger
Mhm.
people, they're more grounded, they're to the earth. They just have that self preservation. They have that core identity. I know who I am and where I'm going. They are more feeling and kinesthetic in the world of hypnosis. The heart brain people are also more feeling type kinesthetic. They have a relational sense, they have an emotional sense, they have values really closely tied to their emotions. As soon as a value gets crossed, or they hear something they don't want to hear, they see something they don't want to see, or they feel something they don't want to feel, they get really emotional about that. That's how I was for a long time. Now I'm a good balance. And the head brain is making meaning of this stuff and your imagination. And it's evolved to where we get into the head brain. And what the head brain does is it also has three parts to it. So it has a reptile part, has a mammalian part, and it has what's called the like monkey mind, which is the same thing. The reptile part is the fight or flight response that most
Right.
people jump into. And at first it was designed, like you said, for hey, saber-toothed tiger, watch
Safety.
out. But now, hey, saber-toothed tiger is that, oh, my post has 10 angry faces. And okay, does it? So I better delete that because I'm in trouble. That's called
Mhm.
flight. That's called running. So a lot of people can relate to that because that's what's going on in today's society is that neurons that fire together wire together, neurons that fire apart wire apart. So we have our spiritual core identity, which means that is what I call your soul self. And then you have soul family that's tied to that, meaning that when you start to align in a certain way of thinking, you find people show up on your path that you're like, wow, I think I've known you for a long time. When you do another thing, like where, like the way I put it is, when I did shady stuff, darkness flooded my life. So dark people came in. When I stopped doing shady stuff, the darkness fled my life. Okay. That's the way I put it. And so once that happened for me, then I found out that I was able to stabilize my spiritual self and line up with more of this, what I call soul family and that core identity. Now, that's all tied to what I call infinite intelligence. A lot of people call that God, but it's intelligent and it's in everything and it is everything. It's made up of everything. And then below that self is your identity self, which we call our ego in the
Mhm.
subconscious community. And it's the clothes we put on, it's the way we dress up and say, hey, I'm here for the world. And you say, I am somebody and I do this thing. So the doctor is dressed up as the doctor, is the way I put that. And then we have our beliefs that go with that. So if I was a doctor and I'm dressed up like a doctor, then I'm going to believe I'm going somewhere to be a doctor today, whether it's an office or a hospital or whatever. And that capability of being able to drive in a doctor's uniform and say, hey, I'm the doctor, allows that behavior to happen. Okay. That's every behavior. So if you're not a doctor, you're a person good at anxiety, then that's anxiety doing that, meaning that you believe you can be anxious, you're capable of thinking about the fearful past, and then you're behaving like you're anxious. You're afraid of the future coming and what's already happened because you've been anxious all this time, right? Then your environment always will reflect what those things are. And the environment is where you find people, where you find connections, the soul family part. So for me, for sure, change happened when I started to get more optimistic and it started to be more fun.
You were putting that into the environment, electromagnetic pulsation that you were creating. I know from Heart Math Institute, it's 12 feet in
Right.
radius that radiated out from the heart space alone. Of course, if you have change, you radiate in different frequency, you start attracting that into your field as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I saw a graphic when I first started on this path, and it was that we have a torsion field around us.
That's
Now, a
right.
torsion field is that it goes out and up. If you think about it, an apple has the round sides and then it comes back in on itself. An apple is an exact example of the divine DNA blueprint. The torsion field is part of that, has the 5 seeds and the pentagram inside. So it's a good thing to reflect on spiritually. But what I found is that when you are in love with somebody, that torsion field around you expands out. Like you said,
Mm.
12 feet, the Heart Math Institute could find. But if you go into fear, really fearful stuff, right? Toilet paper sold out again, whatever, then there we go. We'll be in fear. And that mode will shrink that aura down, and you'll be shrunken down to like maybe 3 feet around you, or even
That's
less
right.
than that, depending on how much fear there is. The
Mm.
Emoto effect has the kind of same science and technology behind it, meaning Dr. Emoto found out if you freeze a bottle of water with the word love written on it, and then slice a slice of the freezing and put it under a microscope, you'll see perfect geometric patterns in the ice. And that if you freeze one and put it under a microscope that says hate on it or fear, it's going to look completely distorted. It's going to look completely incongruent. And a person can say 5% of their conscious mind, I want to be healthy, I want to be happy, I want to be free, but the body's on a whole different program. So then how do you begin to make those changes? You have to get beyond the analytical mind, and you got to get into the subconscious. That's where meditation comes in, or hypnotherapy, because you can teach people to practice their changing through the brainwaves. Now, meditation and hypnotherapy are like, that's the same thing. But it is in a way because the brainwave state's the same. We're going for the
Mhm.
same brainwave state.
We've gone into
Time,
theta, right? From
that's right.
beta
Yeah,
to
alpha
alpha to
and theta.
theta.
So then changing the brainwaves, you slow them down. There's even apps for the iPhone now. There's all kinds of stuff out there that measure your brain waves. And then you can start to see, okay, yeah, that one worked. It slowed it way down. And then if once it's slowed down, I like Joe Dispenza, he says that we're somebody, somewhere, sometime doing something. And in order to find something to come from nothing, you need to go to nothing. So you need to meditate until you become nobody, nowhere, no time, being nothing. And that can be really hard for people because, again, we do attach to our egotistic story.
Mm.
And we
Yeah.
think I am somebody and I do something, especially for the doctor that's been doing it for 60 years. If I try to say, hey, let's go meditate today, he's probably going to say, no way, I got surgery scheduled. I got more important things to do, is what that's called. And a lot of us do that. We think that we have more important things ahead of that. And then we never achieve that nobodiness or that nothingness and that no time. And we stay in this space time reality. But with the hemisync tapes, like you found with Dr. Robert Monroe and these
Right.
other techniques that we can use, we can leave space time very quickly now because we have technology to do that. And then when we leave space time, you can go to nowhere, no time, no thing. And a lot of people call that OBE, or a near death experience. The NDE is very similar to that. And so it turns out that if you allow an emotional reaction for a period of time, then that's called a refractory period. To last for hours or days is called a mood. And somebody says to you, hey, what's up? I'm in a mood. Why are you in a mood? This thing happened to me 5 days ago. So why is he bitter? This thing happened 9 months ago. And if you keep that going on for years, it's called a personality trait. So for me, I had these personality traits I just didn't like. And I had these habits
Mm.
I just didn't like. I had all these things and people and events and recalling events and stress hormones just flooding my system a lot of the time. And then I finally found out that it just comes down to what I thought my identity was. And I changed that. Then I changed my beliefs and my value system around that. I became a lot more spiritual. I found a lot of very spiritual practices like past life sessions, and then that led to yoga, that led to Reiki, Reiki led to sound healing led to martial arts leads to Qigong. All these things are in like the same circle,
Right.
90% of the same
It
soul.
seems like it's practices that promote
Yeah,
presence because living in the now. The practices help us to be in that more conscious mind, but also disconnected, detached from our belief systems and this broken record. So
that's
we
right.
get into
Totally.
a place of perspectives. We can shift quicker because when we do these practices, all of them teach us how to catch ourselves. It's like a spiritual muscle that we go in the gym and
Mm,
practice every day. And it
that's
gets
right.
easier and easier.
And that when you make use of a muscle, you exercise it, you flex it, you give it the right rest and nutrition. That's when it grows stronger. That's when it takes you further, right? To lift more weights, more heavy weights. So you do that enough times with panic attack, you could get that
Definitely.
muscle programmed subconsciously. And people do
So,
that.
yeah.
And I used to do that. I used to have a lot of social anxiety to the point where I'd sit in the parking lot and have these mini panic attacks. Oh my gosh, these people are going to think this about me. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I have my hair looking like that. Now I don't even have hair. See, so I solved that problem. So it's just one of those things we find solutions, right? But back in the day, like 15, 20 years ago, I'd literally sit there in the parking lot at the store and not go in because my hair would look a certain way. I'd think that people were thinking that, like something about that. That's not called not being in the now, first of all.
Mhm.
Because what that is I'm going into the future and I'm thinking what other people think, which is totally made up to me now. It was just a total, but for me, it was really real then. This will relate to a lot of people because they'll find similar circumstances where they do this and they make something up and they buy in. That's what I call that. And the minute you buy in, the minute you believe something, that goes right into the next thing. Are you capable of believing it? Are you capable of freaking out about this? Yeah. Okay. Here we are. Let's freak out then. I found that like when it comes time to change, you're almost saying, why are you this way? Like you're almost saying, what am I even doing right now? That was one I used to say to myself a lot. And now what I say is, am I responding appropriately to my reality right now? Which is a really
Mm,
good way because what that's
that,
going to do
that's
is it's going to
powerful.
audit.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
powerful. It's going to audit what state you're in, your emotions. It's going to audit that
Mhm.
right away.
You're
Say,
doing this like check in that moment.
yeah,
Is this
exactly.
appropriate?
Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah. So even just to repeat it, am I responding appropriately to my reality right now? Makes you
Mhm.
just say, no, I'm not. I'm talking to myself in a bad way. No, I'm not. My physiology is all jacked up. I haven't had any water. I haven't been in the sun. No, I'm not. I'm focused on what I don't have. I'm focused on what I can't control. I'm focused on what isn't working. So then when you have that realization, then you find relevance behind that. But see, if you never ask yourself the question, then you never get the
Mhm.
relevance. You never find out what you're doing. Then you run the same loop or what we call the program, right? Or in the far conscious community, the matrix. And you're absorbed in the matrix of the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 a year. Then when these emotions influence certain thoughts, and they do, and then those thoughts create the same emotions, and those same emotions influence the same thoughts. Now the person's entire state of being is in that mode. And if it's not valuable, if it's not great, then your health gets affected, right? Your breathing gets affected, your blood pressure goes up, all that stuff. And that's called epigenetics. Now we know disease is created by what we think about.
They've done all these studies on
Yeah,
epigenetics because the cortisol levels, for instance, like Holocaust survivors, was so high that it transferred over to their grandchildren. This is how impactful that is.
it is. Yeah. And the brain is about attention and focus. See, when you put attention and focus and you talk to yourself in a certain way, that's called thinking. And
Mm,
then when you have a certain event, like I'm going to go for this job interview, and then you get the job interview, and then you get in that mode of thinking, I have the interview. I need to dress a certain way. And then
mm.
you go ahead and you're like, I need to talk a certain way. And then you go ahead and think, okay, I can talk and dress a certain way. I better see if that works. And then you practice or rehearse it. You see what I mean? So it feels uncomfortable because the neurons that are firing in those events aren't used to doing that. Because very often, unless you're like a pro job interviewer, you're not doing that very often. And so then the hardest part about change is not making the same choice that you did the day before because we want to avoid that, right? Even though on this, I'm like, oh, a podcast. Hold on, how do I get out of it? I even go there now, even knowing all this stuff,
Yeah.
because I'm just like, oh wow, that's different from me yesterday. Hold on a second, that's a little uncomfortable. I think
And
that
uncomfortable is a good place to be. I think that's
yeah,
how we learn. We step out of the
exactly.
sandbox, learning how to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. That's my mantra.
I like
Sometimes
that.
it's very
It is,
challenging, but that's
yeah.
how we grow. And that's why we're here in this school called Earth. We're here to actually be uncomfortable and grow through different levels by experiencing different things. This
That's
is
right.
experiential school.
Yeah, absolutely. I found out when I was trying to stay comfortable, life just threw more and more rocks at me. You know, the minute I said, no, I'm going to go after discomfort and I'm going to stop drinking, I'm going to stop Netflixing, I'm going to stop sitting around all
Mm,
day, I'm going to stop doing all that, I'm going to start going to the gym every day. That was a big discomfort for me. Then I ended up doing it, going to the gym every single day. Then I'm going to do yoga in a yoga class, in a hot yoga class. That was uncomfortable. I did it
mhm.
almost every single day this summer. And it's just like one of those things that like once you start to correspond your thoughts into how you want to feel, then you'll start to do those things automatic. You'll start to go toward those things that are uncomfortable. And then the minute you start to get more and more uncomfortable, the more and more life gets comfortable. More and more things start to work out for you. The body says, we've been doing this for 30 years. So you're just going to stop suffering, stop feeling guilty, and stop feeling shameful. And you're not going to complain or blame or make excuses or feel sorry for yourself. Then the body's in the unknown. And it says, I want to return back to familiar territory. Then the
Mm.
body starts to influence the mind and it says, start tomorrow. Tomorrow is a much better day.
Yeah.
You'll never change. It isn't going to work for you. This doesn't
Mm.
feel right. It starts talking to you in all these ways. A lot of people don't distinguish what they're thinking about or talking to themselves about because they're not in that present moment. See, when I listened to Eckhart Tolle and then I listened to Michael Singer's The Untethered Soul, it was followed up by a book called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Wayne Dyer, right? On my spiritual path, those three books lined up for me. As soon as I read that and I figured out what my thoughts were, I was responding to my thoughts as if they were all true, every single one. Now, I call that default mode now, or drifting, because you're either drifting or you have a definite purpose. And if you have a definite purpose,
Mm.
that means you're thinking about the plan. You're thinking about the interview. You're thinking about the dress. You're thinking about the talk. You're thinking about the tone. You're thinking about the tempo. That's called a plan. That's called being definite. But if you do anything other than that's called drifting for me. Now, if you get definite, that means you're going to get traction toward where you're going faster because we're all going somewhere. Question is just where, right? And we're all arriving sometime. The question is just when, right? And if we get there faster, then I call that traction. But if we do anything other than that, we don't get definite, we start drifting, we just start letting whatever happen, then you may never arrive. It's like being in a sailboat. If you don't set up a compass, you don't set up the wind, you don't know the weather, and you just say, I hope I get there. That's what a lot of people do with their goals. And
In the spiritual circle, so there's a couple of things that you keep on hearing. Surrender is one of
yeah,
them. Another is the spiritual ego that's flaring up. I know everything. I have the truth. This is how it is. So how does that relate to what you're saying? Because you're saying drifting is not necessarily a good thing. So we shouldn't be surrendering. We should be focused, but yet
mm.
still detach maybe from the outcome and not control with our ego self so
Yeah.
much
So
of what.
I'll segue back to the sailboat. If you've ever
Mhm,
been on a sailboat before, there's two main sails. One's called a jib sheet, which is your front sail to catch wind,
mhm,
and then the other's called the main sail to catch wind. That's just like a
mhm,
standard 14 to 20-foot sailboat. And if you go on the sailboat and you're by yourself, you better know how to tie the knots for both of those sails. You better know how to get those sails in alignment and the right wind. Otherwise, you're going to end up tipping over or having some kind of problem. But if so, that's with like people getting those sails lined up. That means that you're thinking, I'm going to do this next. What's my next right move is what I call that. Because when you're sailing, that's all you can ask yourself. What's my next right move? Oh, I got to tie the knot here. What's my next right move? The sail needs to move here. What's my next right move? The wind needs to be checked. We're moving a little fast. What's my next right move? You see what I mean? So I learned how to sail at a younger age. And for me, that taught me we go the way we're facing in the sailboat. And so
mhm,
direction determines your destination. And again, you either arrive quick or slow. So if you catch the wind and you start easy sailing, it's what we call it, then you're going right along with the flow. Things just are go with the flow. You're in the zone in sports. You're hypnotized in the hypnotherapy session. All of that means the same thing. Okay. Means you've got your focus and you're in the zone to where your unconscious mind has it. It's just taking you there. It's going to let you get there. Right. You're going to score the score. You're going to get the tennis ball because
mhm.
try to play tennis with your conscious mind. You'll get hit in the head with the tennis ball.
That's true.
It's just one of those things. It's
So you gotta
true.
be in the middle.
You gotta
Yeah.
be in the middle, and then
In
once
what you're
you start to think a
saying.
thought, you respond to that's true, your unconscious says, "Yep, it is, let's go," and then it starts, and you start sailing. But the minute you start questioning, you're like, "Yeah, I don't think that's the right move. This is messed up. Yeah, it is messed up. I don't feel so good about that." That's called pessimism. Pessimism's a spiraling emotion. It's gonna spiral you down to say, "Yeah, see, it didn't work. The mainsail did go the wrong way, and we're tipping over. See, I hate this. It's not working." So that's the way that goes. And but if you do it the opposite and you say, well, I think it could work, all I gotta do is change this and then change the trajectory. All I gotta do is just line this up. Yeah, it's scary, but we're gonna do it. And then you do it,
Mm,
sure enough, you start sailing again. And that's what sailing is
mm,
about. It's really making mistakes and then figuring them out quick so you don't tip the boat over. And I learned to sail on Quantico Marine Corps Base in Virginia, which is off the Potomac River. And when I did, there's current in that water too. So you do
mm,
get the undertow, so to speak, of things going on. I call that the winds of
mm.
COVID, right? Hit us all. So we all get hit by the same winds, but it's
Winds,
not
yeah.
the winds that hit you, it's what you do about it. If you know how to tack a boat,
And
you
how to
can sail
pivot.
against the wind. You can go against the
Mm,
wind and keep moving forward. But if you don't know how to tack, you're going to panic. You're going to be like, wow, winds are hitting
mm,
me. I'm not moving anywhere. things aren't going my way, is what we call that in reality. So it's a good metaphor for people to really
I love
catch
that
on.
metaphor
Yeah.
to understand how this works. And I totally agree with you. It's all about being in that flow. And the minute we start creating resistance,
Hmm.
we energetically creating these knots in our field. And the more resistance we have in the field, the more we attract that resistance to us and we negatively manifest. It's just not working. The minute we relax and go with the flow, but with full faith and trust that we'll get to the destination with whatever timeline, then it starts going. Then the boat is flowing perfectly.
That's yeah,
Yeah.
easy sailing, like we say in sailing, and then you're
Sailing.
great is what we call it in reality or emotions, right? You either have a great mood or you have a not so great mood, is how I put it.
Yeah.
The great mood will affect your health, we know, and a not so great mood will affect your health in the day. The day will turn to a week and a month and so on. So, yeah, for me, like I said, I had a not so amazing time turn to an amazing time. And I call that all through imagining it. I call that, or self hypnosis is another way to put that. Because what you're conjuring up in your mind, those worst case scenarios, especially, and then you begin to feel the emotion of that event, your body doesn't know the difference. Doesn't know the
Mhm.
difference between the event that's taking place in your outer world and what you're creating by emotion or thought alone. But you have to distinguish, and it's not always so simple to do that, but it is some simple practices that you can start to do to just become aware of. Am I responding appropriately? What's my next right move? Those sorts of questions will get into your unconscious and start to make it think. It'll start to make it go, okay, my next right move probably isn't the bag of Doritos and Netflix. It's probably to go and for the walk. It's 80 degrees out. Let's go for the walk. But if you don't question it and you go unconscious, you'll grab the bag of Doritos and Netflix. And you'll be on an 80-degree day in front of the TV for 6 hours watching Lost. That's what I used to do. What an appropriate show to get lost in, right? So for me, it was always one of those things of just changing the story. Then neurons that fire together wired together. And then once I changed it, neurons that were firing apart started wiring apart. And I found more cognition embodied.
Your sessions help people to get there. How does that look like for others that are working with you? What are things about hypnotherapy that most people don't know about? Because you are changing
Yeah.
people's habits. Is it you just helping them root those habits and in affirmations and repetition in those brain waves that we discussed?
That is a great question. We have a left brain and a right brain. The left brain is more like a tree. It grows straight up. It grows vertical and then linear. And so you got little branches of things you know. So that's chronological order, things happening. Baby to a toddler to a child to a teenager to an adult. That's a tree structure. It's dualistic as well. So it's thinking bad, good, yeah, no, hot, cold, all that stuff. It's really thinking and labeling. Labels equal judgment, equal separation. Then you have categorization go on in the left brain because of the labels and the judgment. And then that's called, Aristotelian logic too, comes in, all the Aristotelian stuff. Then you've got the right brain, which is more like a rhizome. This is like a plant like ginger. It grows under the ground, laterally has roots, and they separate off into these chunks. That's why you get these big ginger chunks. Then the roots grow off of each chunk. So that's more of a planar movement. It's like multiplicity, non Aristotelian logic. You've got lots of right brain curiosity. You've got no specific origin. You can go any which way with it. I feel that hypnotherapy is changing. Everything is changing, and it is a process. So when we freeze or have a still picture, then that's the tree. That's what you're perceiving. So
Mhm.
people have a trauma event happen, and then they freeze that. Some
Yeah.
people freeze it as a short movie. Some people would put it as a GIF. Some people would put it as just as a still image. But whatever it is, you freeze this image and then you perceive it. That's called remembering. A lot of people think remembering is thinking, but it's really not. You're just in your left brain remembering. But when you're thinking, you're going off into that rhizome and you're going off into the right brain. And thatness, we're always part of something larger. There's a large web of connections and then a smaller web of connections, like I started in with yoga, connecting to qigong, connecting to breath work, connecting to sound healing. So what connections are we observing and what connections are we not including? Then that will dial you into what you're connected to. That's why I call it that, because if you're dialed in on a radio and you're in a good mood, I call that music. You're going to hear your favorite song even. But if you're dialed in and you're in a bad mood, you're going to hear static. That's what the
Mm,
radio does. So if you
yeah.
tune the dial right just to the left and you think about something negative, that could put you in static. Sometimes you're just doing that. Wow, why did I think about that thing that happened when I was 12 years old? That really sucked in middle school or whatever happened. Then you go off into static for a little bit thinking about that. But then when you're like, what's done is done, whatever happened is what's supposed to happen. You take that kind of attitude, you tune back into music. You see what I mean? And so there's always multiple planes and dimensions and points of view. I like Buddhism, they call it the void. I like Hinduism, they call it the Akash too. I like both words. But it's just multiple planes that we can access. We can assign, meaning that it can be broken off at any point and it grows back and it's part of the whole still, right? So the map can be entered at any point. It's eccentric. So the beginning and ending points are arbitrary the way we think about it is totally opposite of that. We think the ending is death and that's the worst thing ever. We think the beginning is birth and little babies are the cutest thing ever. So we really do associate that, but it's part of the illusion or the Aristotelian logic. What you're focusing on is what makes it the problem and that makes it not changing. And then what's changing about the issue in the way you want it is what you've not been paying attention to. With hypnotherapy, we just get you to start thinking about what you've not been paying attention to on your unconscious level. Then once you start to find out what's been going on unconsciously that you've not been paying attention to, you pay attention to it. 90% of change comes from attention. It comes from awareness.
Mm,
So if you're not aware, nothing will change. But if you're aware of it, like I was with the social anxiety to those many panic attacks to drinking alcohol to numb that down, to playing video games to numb that down, all that stuff, then I started to find out as I'm feeling all this now, what happens when I think about that issue? It starts to grow, that issue. But then when I started to connect all these parts differently and I started to ask, how am I feeling different? Then I would change the connections. The issue would change. For me, it was always just trying to reframe is a good way to put it. Because we have a cause and effect, we have a problem, and we either call that problem bad and we start to panic, or we call that problem good. And we start to look for the resources in it. And we start to find out what's good. And for me, I've done it both ways, where I would say problem bad, and then I'd find a bad and all the stuff with that. It would sometimes stay a problem a lot longer. Now I do it different. Now I try to say good because there is some good usually in every problem. So that way you start looking for the good first, you find that kind of hidden ability or that outcome faster, right? Because change can only occur in now. We know that. And so to shift habits and attentions and kind of punctuate experience, we have to slow things down sometimes and create space to slow things down. And then that sorts out our states, I think. That kind of gets us involved. The Qigong experts like Montauk Chia, I really like
mhm,
him. He says we have two brains and that the second brain is your stomach and that
yeah,
if you send energy and you smile to all the internal organs, you'll have no problems, is what they say in Qigong. Because that's to them talking to the body. Because the body in hypnosis, we know, is half a second before the conscious thought. So when I'm doing hypnotherapy with somebody, I'm talking to their body. The brain's a beautiful tool, but it's not the one we use in hypnotherapy. We talk to the body and the emotions. The body is most connected to the unconscious processing because it's always in now. Then neuroplasticity happens when you start to go non-linear, you get away from the
mm,
tree and you start to
okay,
move more in that rhizomatic perception. So we always have a present state, which I call PS, which can be your problem state as well, because it's in the present. Now, every problem is constructed. Okay. So whatever you've perceived the problem to be has been constructed in your mind on some level. The bigger the problem, the bigger the construction, meaning that when I have to ask about a really big problem, it can take a while for you to explain it to me in words. That's why therapy and therapists aren't going anywhere because there's plenty of time to construct problems with words. You see what I mean? And that's what that does. Once you get out of the therapy, when CBT and other therapy models are catching on to this, we want to dissociate from the PS, from the problem present state. We want to associate to what I call the RS, which is the resource state. You want to associate the resource state to the present state. And what that does is it simplifies things for the mind. It programs, it's called reprogramming. Once we do the reprogramming, then the statement is try to put it back. A good example of this is a problem state of anxiety. A lady thought about bees the minute she pulled up to a drive-through because she got stung by a bee there and it ended up being a
mm,
bad deal. She was allergic and had to go to the hospital from the drive-through the whole thing. And then when she would get to the drive-through, she wouldn't open her window, but just a little tiny crack, and the people couldn't hear her, and she was having this problem. When I worked with her, I say, imagine a bee comes in here, what would you do? And she started to freak out. She started to get scared. I said,
Yeah.
okay, just imagine maybe going to a drive-through, just sitting here, you're on the couch, you're comfortable, but just imagine going through the drive-through. And she started to freak out more because she was good at making pictures. So that's called associating to the present problem state, is what she was doing. And then to dissociate her from it, all I simply did was I said, okay, now just imagine you're in a movie theater and you're way up in the projector booth behind some bulletproof glass and there's no way anything's getting in there. Now watch that scene of you in the drive-through on the movie screen. But I want you to do it in a special way. I want you to do it in black and white, which is called the fast phobia cure in hypnosis. And once they watch that movie in black and white from an altered state, it dissociates the problem state very well. Then what happens is the resource state is that you can roll your window down just fine. And you're going to feel great once you feel that nice breeze, was her resource state. So we associated to that. Then we associated that the window's all the way down. You're feeling that nice breeze and the bee has showed up. But what's happening now? And it's not a problem, was her reaction. Okay.
Mm.
The bee landed on me. I just swiped it away. It flew off, is what she said. So I brought her back up and I said, okay, let's just test this out. Let's just make sure that worked. And I told her, I said, it's a very simple illustration. I just want you to imagine a bee flies in here and it's just flying around. Okay, I'm okay. All right, just now imagine you're back at the drive-through. I'm okay. So you see, that's all that is.
Yeah.
Simplified is that we associate to a present state. We think it's a problem, and the magic word is until it's not. How do you want to be different? Then you find out how you want to be different. What's it like when you're different? Like, how do you know? And like she told me, I know I'm different because I feel that breeze and I feel fine. And as you're feeling fine, think about that problem. Boom, can't happen. Can't feel fine and have a problem at the same time. So that's how we make
Yeah.
change happen. Every
That's really
question,
incredible. And
yeah,
it's
every session, what do you want to work through? How do you want to be
yeah.
different? And that's everybody's story. Then once you find those answers to that question, we can work through it. We can make that happen.
Do you think a person that comes to you, they need to be on some level like ready for the change? Because it's like going and getting energy healing, but
Yeah.
shell off because you're not ready to receive.
Because as you're associated to the problem, sometimes the problem is okay for people to have. So you have now happening with the association to the problem. Change happens in the now, but it's because of redirected attention, or you've dissociated from the problem state. You've activated the functioning, which is called the corpus callosum. I'm trying to keep it light, but there's so much knowledge. But yeah, once you start to hemisync your brain, you might get your attention redirected there. Once your attention's redirected around the problem, like it was for me with all those problems I've told you I've had, I just associated the resource state, which was those things of what's happening now. What am I experiencing now that I don't drink? What am I noticing now that I don't smoke? What am I seeing now that I don't watch Netflix all day? What am I hearing now that I don't listen to video games on my headset and I have podcasts going instead? What am I feeling now that I'm in a better, healthier place than I've been? What am I thinking now? Those are called resources. We all have those, but we don't often think about them. But when you start to associate to the resource now, then that starts to reconsolidate the big picture. And reconsolidation is a well researched and important phase of memory for how we maintain what's stability and persistence and relevant in our memory. From an evolutionary point of view, it's our systems, like our nervous system's attempt to update memories, particularly those with a strong emotion tied to them. They remain meaningful and relevant. When you had the beat happen, it's very relevant, right? It happened. You're going to a drive-through again, so it becomes even more relevant. You can't get a person with an elevator phobia to not think about elevators.
Mm. Yeah. That
You
makes
have to
sense.
think about it, and that means it's properly reactivated once you think, oh, I'm going into an elevator, I better be scared, because it makes it susceptible. You
Mm.
have the current representation of what's going on, the language, the distinctions, the sensory experience. Then you have that new representation, which is reconsolidating and reprogramming the unconscious awareness of everything else that you're not paying attention to consciously. There's the elevator phobia, and there's everything that's not. What I tell my clients is, which one's bigger? Everything that's not, or the elevator phobia? For
Mm.
them, sometimes it's the elevator phobia, but for anybody that doesn't have it, they obviously know on the pie chart that's going to be one little sliver, and the rest of it is everything that's not, because you have love, you have compassion, you have joy, you have escalators, you have staircases, you have everything that's not an elevator. There's a lot of stuff there. That's called unconscious awareness, everything else that you're not paying attention to consciously. And
It's
so we all
interesting because
process.
I was just looking at, I don't know if you're familiar with David Hawkins' frequency chart, and those law of emotions that we just discussed that kind of trap the blame, the shame, the fear, they lower in the frequency bandwidth. And to move towards the higher enlightenment stages, we do have to go to love. We do have to go to joy and peace, actually, the highest vibrations before we hit that full enlightenment, which is really interesting because that is peace is a complete dissociation, right? Joy is just feeling that openness in the heart and just feeling that unconditional love, which is interesting because love on his scale is lower than joy, which I found is fascinating as well. How the emotions that are trapping us in these specific states of consciousness and releasing them and reprogramming have to do with our ascension process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In my world, we call it a trigger or a synesthesia, meaning that there's something visually that happens to you. You see something, that's called a trigger. Because you see
Mm.
something and you feel a way, like you see a bee and you feel scared, that's called a visual trigger. Now, synesthesia is when two or more happen. So we have visual, what we see, auditory, what we hear, and kinesthetic, what we feel. So if you feel something and then you see something that really makes you feel it more, it means you have two things happening. If you hear
Mm.
something and then put up a picture in your mind, that's called a auditory visual synesthesia. Now, what that synesthesia does in one single context is it elicits an emotion, an emotional state. And I like Abraham Hicks on emotions. They say your emotions are your guidance scale. So you're either in a positive mental attitude, is what I call it, meaning that you're in optimism, spiraling up to love, joy, compassion, peace, wholeness, all that stuff up here, or you're in a negative mental attitude and you're going into pessimism, telling the story, I don't think this is going to work. See, it's not working. I told
Mhm.
you it wouldn't work. I hate this. And you're in hate, anger, rage, revenge, all that stuff, jealousy. And actually, lust is one of the slowest moving and lowest vibrations that there are. That is your present state. And one of the low vibrations or the high vibrations based on the Abraham Hicks scale. Then your emotion, your emotional state, then causes you to behave. So if you're in fear, and then you go and do something, it's going to be far different than if you're loving it and you're doing something. You see what I mean? And so it's just one of those things that once you change your state, and this is done three ways: language, touched on that a little bit, of you're talking to yourself. You're talking to yourself in a tone. You're talking to yourself in a tempo. And is when I get off the call with Deanna, I'm going to say, "Hey, what did I even say? What did she? Hold on, what did she look like when I said that?" That's language. If that's not positive, that's going to cause your state to be probably not so positive. Physiology is next. If you don't get sunlight, you don't get water, you don't sit up straight, you don't walk around, you don't get exercise, you don't breathe as deeply and fully as you could, you don't stretch the body, move the spine in every direction like the yogis, you might get into a bad mood quicker, because the physiology has to do with being in a good mood or bad mood. And then the last thing is your focus. Are we focused on more of what we can or can't control most of the time? Are we focused on more of what is or isn't working? And that one's easy to fall into, what isn't working. See, I've already said like 100 things on here, but if I say number 101 wrong, which one will we all think about? The one I said wrong, right? And then what we can't control, also easy, right? Toilet paper is sold out. I even went looking for it. It's just one of those things like, hold on a sec. That's something I can't control. So what it did was it associated me to a problem state, and then it changed my emotional state. You see what I mean? So then for me, that's the way I've been. How do I want to be different? How would I be as a person knowing that this problem's no longer an issue in my life? Then I put myself there. Once I put myself there, my unconscious follows me there. You do it with your consciousness, and your unconscious follows you. Your unconscious is amazing. It has everything it's ever stored. All the things you've ever heard and seen and done well at is there. But maybe you haven't listened to that or heard that part of you in a long time, maybe since you played sports even, or needed to have that kick on. So then that's how it's an ease of accessing versus having it difficult to access by training yourself. Because this stuff does take training. A lot of
Yeah.
people will say, I'm trying to do it, but trying means you're failing at it. So I like to call it training because keeps it lighter and it keeps it going. The NFL calls it training camp. They don't call it tryouts. They call it weight training, not weight trying, right? If I tried to open the door, that means I didn't open it. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where you got to catch the language. So I'm touching on that again too. And then what it does is it boosts
The
your
language
state,
is
it
super
boosts your mood.
important. In one of the podcasts, Denise and I started touching about it a little bit. We are living in death culture in a
Mm.
language that is, in some ways, I feel controlled for us to feel in a certain vibration. Light language and other ways of communication and expression where some of those limitations are not there. And that's where the soul, the heart can speak. It's not so much in the mind and direct translation of what we say. And
Oh, yeah, for sure. You think about all the different language all throughout time. You have light, spirit, and body. Mer, Mercury, Ka, Caduceus, Ba, balance. The
balance,
body
yeah.
is balance. Ka is the spirit. Caduceus, which is the caduceus staff, the snakes spiraling
Yes,
up, the medical symbol.
Kundalini.
And then Mer is Mercury, light. It's one of these things that we all have words for different things. And that's where the word for wise is magus, which became magic, magician.
Yeah.
And Thoth is the oldest known doctor, healer, magician. So that's why you'll see a lot of people in the conscious community go in with the name Thoth and start to use him a lot as a deity and kind of a symbol as part of their practice, part of their readings. All that is tied to language because we have structures of language based around the evolution of it. I talked about with the Emoto effect, words have power. We know that if you say love to a plant over and over, the plant grows stronger. If you say hate to the plant over and over, it grows weaker. So people would be no exception. They all tie to the elements. It all ties to a frequency. It all ties to UV spectrums and sine waves. So it gets into some deepness, but there's basically like a toroidal field around you. When you have language enter your being, whether that's from ancient Egyptian language, you're reading some hieroglyphs that you're starting to like just go and analyze. I remember going to some museums and I'm like just absorbed by these sarcophaguses covered in these magical symbols
Wow.
and just trying to get a depiction about what they mean. 5 minutes later, walking in front of the sign saying, oh, this is what they mean. So it's far off from what I thought. I did not think that this was weighing the heart with a feather and that they were flying off in a boat to the other world to see if they can make it back over on the other side through the same boat. And a lot of people call that hocus pocus these days. And I think that is part of the problem, Deanna, is that the language is diminishing down. We're an emoji type of need
Right.
acronyms for everything. Like we
Right.
need an IKR instead of I know right. We need a HMU instead of hit me up. Those are the acronyms I'm talking about. We need all these different things to match our instant coffee, instant tea type of society that we're in. And I think that's the wrong way about doing it. I think that the words that are more full and have more of a profound meaning, like a singular meaning, are a lot better than these short words that are causing a bunch of confusion. I like to say bad means good because it does today. In the 1930s, if you called something bad, it meant it was bad, right? But in the
Mm.
2030s, if you call it bad, people are going to have no idea. You're going to say, hey, she's bad. At what? I'm going to look at her. See, it means good. So it's like a very confusing thing. You ever hear anybody say, yeah, no? Somebody
Yeah.
did it to me 3 times in a row the other day. I asked the question, yeah, no, hold on, no, yeah, no. I'm like,
Yeah.
what is it? See,
It's, but I
you
think
know,
it's a human way of creating dialects of
yeah.
understanding because English is not my first language, actually my third language. And I remember when I was learning it as a kid, it was hard to understand American movies because the British way that you learn it and it's very proper versus
Yeah.
all these like modifications of the language and obviously different dialects from different cities. It's interesting how it's tied to our psyche, to our society, and evolution, also our environments. And I feel like we are at this precipice of opening up to express ourselves in a way that really serves us and maybe not always trying to put meaning to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it started in labels equal judgment equal
Right.
separation. Separation equals decisions and division. That word means the
Mm.
same thing. The evolution of that word comes from Latin, which means to cut off from, literally. So when you're making a decision, making a division, you're cutting off from the other side. which we're seeing very clearly in an election year. We're seeing that very clearly with the Super Bowl. We're seeing that all over the place
Mm,
once you start to pay
yeah.
attention. But if you're not paying attention, these things just happen. You don't really think about, okay, I am really labeling this. I am really judging this. I am really divided about this, because you don't think about what you're labeling. That's all in the higher brain, which is this front part, which is metaphorical. It's the neocortex. The mammal brain, the monkey mind, is the kind of the social, the emotional brain. And then the fight or flight brain is the back of the head, which is the reptilian brain, connected right to the chakra system, right to the spinal cord. That's where the head is heaven, the heel is hell. So the hell is the body, the heart is the earth rearranged. So hell is below the earth, heaven is above the earth, and the earth is on this plane where we are right now. If you rearrange the letters of the word earth, it spells heart, which is the soul, which is the emotional, which is the middle brain. This is the name Jesus. If we give it the name is God, it's the mind, it's the mental. And if we go hell, the heel, then that's the physical, that's the body. We could call it the devil, right? Or whatever you want to call it. It's the little pitchfork guy. It's that Horus. It's just, we always have it as a ground animal representing the lower self. That's how it always shows up. And then the angel always has wings and bird-like features, meaning it's a higher self. And we've been controlled to keep this metaphysical concept of Jesus and Satan to make people look outside of themselves. And this lack of awareness of their own consciousness then creates a society operating their lives out of the lower chakras, which is what we see occurring today with lines, people buying alcohol and McDonald's and all that stuff. I don't think that people really need that. You know what I mean? I think over time people are going to find out, oh yeah, I really didn't need that. It's just one of those things. They're not really fully balanced yet. There's the masculine, which is fire, and then there's the feminine, which is water, or
Water,
the
yeah.
sun and the moon. The
Right.
conscious is the sun, the masculine, the subconscious is the feminine, it's the water. It's the right brain, which is art awareness, it's creativity, it's imagination, it's intuition. That's the masculine, that's the sun. The
Mm.
left brain is analytical, it's logic, it's language, it's reasoning, science, and it's breaking down the unified perception even of the right hemisphere into singular segments. It's important to break these things down, because I think a lot of people don't understand. Sin in Latin is sinister. It means left. Right equals righteous. And I say if it's right all the time, it's got to go left at some point. So we want it balanced.
I
Okay.
love that.
Yeah. Isn't it
In
crazy?
my
Language.
case, is you wanna be right or do you wanna be happy? So the
Exactly.
happy is going to the left or yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's where you start to balance instead of
It's
thinking
all
you're right
about
all the time.
balance and alignment. Completely agree with you. And that because we are in this dualistic type of creation, and that's reflected in our body, in our brain, in our society. And so I think our role right now is to find that balance, that unified field, that Shoshuna, that middle column within
Yeah,
ourselves, and learn how
exactly.
to be more and more in that present now.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is really a balance of both hemispheres because they participate and contribute in all activities. However, they do it in different ways. One's a scientist, one's an artist. One's
Yes.
collaborative, one's competitive. You see what I mean? One controls the right side of the body, one controls the left. One's in language, one's in creativity. It's just finding that balance of using both things, using language with intuition, using feelings with what's materialistic. Doing all that stuff is when I get the most spiritual or the most leveled up, and spinning the Merkaba and really finding synchronicity after synchronicity and divine thing happen after divine thing happen, where I'm really balanced. There's the fire, the sharpness, the dullness of the earth, but there's also some thinness of the air, and there's some dullness of the water, the movement and thickness. So it really does always come in to thin or thick, movement or stillness, and balancing that out. Is it dry? Is it wet? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it fire? Is it water? I like the movie Elemental because it does do a good job where Disney kind of shows what's going on. There's
Yeah, all the
spirit, there's
elements at
fire,
play
there's
here.
air, there's water,
Yeah.
there's earth. They're all happening, right?
Well, it's all that sacred geometry, ultimately, the platonic
Mhm.
solids and all the elements that are here in the ether. So we are just playing them out in so many different variations within the human experience,
Yeah.
ultimately. But it goes back to those platonic solids. So incredible and beautiful. Any closing thoughts? Maybe tell us, Andrew, how someone can reach you, book a session with you if they're interested to change their habits and maybe dive deeper into their
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate the time to discuss all this cool stuff. And
yeah, we
yeah,
can
it
keep
has
on
been
going
really
and
great.
going. I know there's so much, so many rabbit
Oh my
holes.
goodness, yes, absolutely. But yeah, people can get a hold of me by just going to vibrationalhypnosis.com. You can also just type in vibrational hypnosis to any of the social media platforms. You'll find my accounts. I'm the only one. I'm in the location of Springfield, Missouri, but I do sessions worldwide with people via Zoom. It's just a process where we can work one on one together. We can, again, just talk about what's been going on and what you want to be different. How do you want to be different? And I could show you those tips and techniques and strategies that I use to make that happen. When you do work with somebody, something just kicks in to where you start to get a big boost of energy toward what you're going for.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate all that wisdom that you're sharing and all the work that you're doing across the world to help others to
Yeah, for
really
sure.
see how to shift. Because ultimately, I think that's what we're here for, is to help others to see the other perspectives, to change their habits, their open up to other possibilities, and ultimately connect to the soul, connect to their hearts, connect to why they're really here, and live in the most beautiful, thriving lives, because that's the positive mindset. So much to learn, and thank you so much for
Yeah,
bringing
for
all the
sure.
wisdom of positive thinking, questioning your reality. Right?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I think I want to close with the fact that no one really knows the ultimate truth. Therefore, we are just here sharing all the possible truths that are out there. It's always good to have a guide in your journey. So, reach out to Andrew for diving deeper into learning about yourself. You can reach out to me to learn more about other ways you can open up to your soul language, and always know you're supported and you have community that is here for you wherever you are. You're never really stuck. Thank you,
Perfect.
Andrew, and
Thank
have
you,
a
Deanna.
many blessings. And thank you, everyone, and see you next episode.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to see our other episodes, and don't forget to subscribe.